It was the first weekend of October when my friends and I decided to venture out to the Smoky Mountains for some adventure. We had been planning this trip for weeks. Me, Mark, along with Emily, Jake, and Lisa. We were eager to escape the hustle and bustle of the city and immerse ourselves in nature. We rented an old cabin at the base of the mountains, rustic yet well-maintained, nestled in a dense forest. It had all the essentials: running water, electricity, even a fireplace, which was perfect as the nights were getting colder. We arrived at the cabin just before sunset. The drive was smooth, and our spirits were high as we unloaded the car. The cabin stood isolated, surrounded by towering trees with leaves just starting to turn golden and red. It was peaceful, offering the kind of quiet you only find far from civilization. That first night, we gathered around a campfire we built outside. The crackling flames and cool night air set the perfect mood. We talked about the trail we'd hike the next day, a less traveled path that promised beautiful views and a good workout. Emily, our planner, pulled out the maps and reviewed the route one last time. We laughed and joked, roasting marshmallows and simply enjoying each other's company. Morning came, and we were up with the sun. After a quick breakfast, we packed our bags, water, snacks, a first aid kit, the usual stuff. We set off, the air crisp and the sky clear. The trail was as beautiful as we had hoped. We walked through dense woods, crossed little streams, and climbed rocky paths. About 2 hours in, things started to feel strange. We stumbled upon an old campsite completely abandoned. The fire pit was cold, and remnants of food and gear were scattered around as if someone had left in a hurry. It gave us the creeps, but we shrugged it off. People leave campsites messy all the time, right? We kept walking, but the path became confusing. The map showed a clear trail, yet we kept encountering forks and side paths that weren't marked. It was unsettling, but we stuck together and tried to stay on what looked like the main trail. Then we met the man. He appeared out of nowhere, stumbling out of the trees, looking disheveled and frantic. He was muttering to himself, his clothes torn and dirty. He asked for water, and Jake handed him a bottle. The man gulped it down and then looked at us with wild eyes. He started talking about how he'd been lost for days, how the trails kept changing, and how he couldn't find his way back. He seemed genuinely scared, but there was something off about him. He insisted on following us, saying he knew a shortcut back to the cabin. Jake immediately didn't trust him and suggested we keep going our own way. The guy got agitated, almost desperate, insisting we follow him. That's when Jake put his foot down, telling the guy to leave us alone. The man's demeanor shifted from pleading to menacing in a heartbeat. We decided to move quickly, not running, but walking fast enough to put some distance between us. Emily kept looking back, saying he was following us, and sure enough, every time I glanced over my shoulder, he was there, just far enough to keep out of reach, but close enough to keep us uneasy. By the time we got back to the cabin, it was late afternoon, and we were all on edge. We locked every door and window, trying to reassure each other that it was just a weird encounter and nothing more. We cooked dinner, but the atmosphere was tense. Every sound outside made us jump. Night fell and we tried to sleep, but around midnight we heard noises outside, branches snapping, footsteps crunching on the gravel. I crept to the window and peeked out. There he was, the same man, standing just beyond the tree line, watching the cabin. My heart raced. I whispered to the others, and we all gathered around, peeking through the curtains. Suddenly, he started towards the cabin, trying the door handle, banging on the windows, demanding to be let in. We called the police, our voices shaking. They told us to stay inside and that they'd send someone as soon as they could. Meanwhile, the man continued his assault on the cabin, yelling and trying to force his way in. We barricaded the door with furniture and huddled together, waiting. It felt like hours, but it was probably just 30 minutes before we saw the flashing lights. The man took off into the woods as the police car approached. The officers checked around but found no sign of him. They took our statements and assured us they'd patrol the area for the rest of the night. We didn't sleep at all, and as soon as the sun rose, we packed up and left. The ride back was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. That weekend was supposed to be an escape, but it turned into a nightmare. We never found out who that man was or why he was out there. All I know is that sometimes the real danger isn't from the wilderness, but from the people who wander in it. After we returned home, we couldn't stop thinking about what happened. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a weird, isolated incident, but it stuck with me. Jake, who's usually the most laid back of us, was visibly shaken. He kept replaying the events in his head, wondering if we'd missed any signs earlier on. Emily did some research and found out that there had been a few reports of strange encounters in the Smoky Mountains, but nothing as intense as what we experienced. Lisa, on the other hand, became almost obsessed with the idea that the man was part of something bigger, some kind of hidden community living off the grid. She started reading about urban legends and unsolved mysteries in the area, feeding her curiosity, but also her anxiety. A couple of weeks later, we got a call from the local police. They'd found the man. Apparently, he'd been living in the woods for months, surviving on whatever he could find. He had a history of mental illness and had disappeared from a nearby town the previous spring. The police assured us he was now receiving the help he needed, but it didn't make us feel much better. We all agreed to stay away from hiking trips for a while. The experience left a mark on us, a reminder that no matter how prepared you think you are, there are things out there you can't anticipate. Sometimes the scariest stories aren't about ghosts or monsters, but about real people with real problems that intersect with our lives in the most unexpected and terrifying ways. And so, that's the story of our dangerous hike in the Smoky Mountains. A trip that was supposed to be filled with laughter and beautiful memories turned into a haunting experience none of us will ever forget. Every time I think about going back to the mountains, I remember that man's wild eyes and the sheer terror of that night. It's a reminder that the wilderness holds many secrets, and not all of them are the peaceful, picturesque kind we like to imagine. My brother Tom and I had been planning this kayaking trip for months. We wanted to escape the daily grind and reconnect with nature, so we chose a remote river in Oregon, known for its untamed beauty and challenging rapids. We rented a small, rustic cabin near the river's starting point, a place so isolated it felt like we were the only two people in the world. When we arrived, the cabin was exactly what we expected, simple but surrounded by breathtaking scenery. Tall pine trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the distant sound of rushing water was both calming and exhilarating. That first night, we laid out our gear, checked our kayaks, and spread the map of the river across the old wooden table. We traced our route with our fingers, excitedly discussing the spots we wanted to explore. The next morning, we woke up at the crack of dawn. The air was crisp, and a thin layer of fog hovered over the river, making it look almost mystical. We launched our kayaks into the cold, clear water and began our journey. The thrill of the river's current, combined with the serene beauty of the surrounding forest, was exactly what we needed. A few hours into our adventure, we noticed something odd. Another kayak was trailing us, just far enough away that we couldn't see the paddler's face clearly. We waved and shouted a friendly greeting, but the person didn't respond. He just kept following us, maintaining his distance. Feeling a bit uneasy, we decided to take a break in a small cove to rest and have some lunch. The other kayaker stopped too, positioning himself a bit downstream where he could still see us. Tom and I exchanged worried glances but tried to shrug it off. Maybe he was just another nature enthusiast like us, enjoying the solitude of the river. After our break, we paddled on, but the presence of the other kayaker was making it hard to enjoy the scenery. The river's current grew stronger, and navigating the rapids demanded our full attention. Every time I glanced back, the man was there, always keeping his distance, yet never losing sight of us. We finally reached a stretch of the river where the rapids became particularly intense. It was here that things took a turn for the worse. Out of nowhere, the man's kayak surged forward. He paddled aggressively, heading straight for Tom. Before we could react, he rammed Tom's kayak, trying to tip it over. Tom fought to stay upright, his kayak rocking dangerously in the tumultuous water. I screamed for him to hold on as I tried to paddle closer, but the stranger was relentless. Tom managed to fend him off, and we paddled furiously, trying to put as much distance between us and the man as possible. The rapids were treacherous, with rocks and branches threatening to capsize us at any moment. In the chaos, I lost my grip on the paddle and was thrown against a boulder. Pain shot through my arm, but the adrenaline kept me moving. We somehow managed to navigate through the worst of the rapids and found a calmer stretch of water. Exhausted and scared, we didn't stop until we reached the shore near our cabin. We pulled our kayaks onto the bank and stumbled into the cabin, our hearts pounding. Tom blocked the door with a heavy table while I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. I explained our situation, describing the man and our location as best I could. As we waited for the police, every sound outside seemed amplified. The crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig, it all sent waves of fear through us. Just when we thought we were safe, we heard footsteps approaching the cabin. The doorknob rattled, and then came the sound of something heavy slamming against the door. Tom braced himself against the table, trying to keep it in place. Finally, the wail of sirens pierced the night. The footsteps retreated, and moments later, the police arrived. They caught the man trying to flee into the woods. It turned out he was a fugitive, wanted for a series of violent crimes in the area. Tom and I were shaken, but safe. That night, as we sat in the cabin, still on edge but relieved, we realized how close we had come to real danger. Our weekend adventure had turned into a nightmare, one we wouldn't soon forget.